Ma'am, you're on in 60 seconds. The event coordinator smiled as she adjusted the microphone clip to my blazer. I nodded, but I barely heard her. My eyes were locked on the ballroom through a narrow gap in the backstage curtain. More than 600 people filled the room. CEOs, investors, journalists, business owners from across Texas. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors. A giant LED screen displayed the logo of my company. Carter Creative Group. 3 years ago, I couldn't afford newborn diapers. Now, 600 people were waiting to hear me speak. Life has a strange sense of timing. Sometimes, it lets the people who hurt you believe they won. Then it quietly spends years proving them wrong. My phone vibrated. One new message. It was from Sarah. No matter who's sitting in that audience, remember why you built this company. I smiled, then I looked toward the front row. That's when I saw him, Daniel, my ex-husband, the man who walked out of our home while I was 8 months pregnant. The man who looked me in the eyes and said, "I deserve a better life than this." He looked different now. More gray around his temples. More lines across his face. The expensive confidence he used to wear every day was gone. He sat beside several executives, casually checking emails on his phone. Loving, completely unaware. He had absolutely no idea who the keynote speaker was. He had no idea whose company had organized this conference, and he definitely had no idea that in less than 1 minute, the woman he abandoned would walk onto that stage. The coordinator touched my shoulder. "Emma? They're ready." I took one slow breath. Funny. People think moments like this are about revenge. They're not. If you had asked me 3 years ago what I wanted, I would have said, "I just want my husband back." If you had asked me 1 year later, I would have said, "I just want to pay my rent." And if you had asked me today, I'd tell you something completely different. I wanted peace. Nothing more, nothing less. The ballroom lights dimmed. The conversations faded. A spotlight illuminated the stage. The announcer stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the room. Today's keynote speaker built one of the fastest growing independent marketing companies in Texas from absolutely nothing. A few people applauded politely. Daniel didn't even look up. The announcer continued. "Please join me in welcoming." There was a brief pause. Founder and CEO of Carter Creative Group. Another pause, then, Emma Carter. For one long second, nothing happened. Then Daniel slowly lifted his head. His eyes met mine. The color drained from his face so quickly that even the man sitting beside him turned to ask if he was okay. He never answered. His coffee cup slipped from his hand. It hit the floor. Coffee splashed across the polished marble. He didn't even notice. He was staring at me. The pregnant wife he had left behind was standing under the brightest spotlight in the room. The audience rose to their feet. Applause filled the ballroom. Camenter flashes lit up the stage. I smiled not because Daniel was watching, but because for the first time in 3 years, I realized something. I hadn't won because he lost. I had won because I never gave up. But before I tell you how a terrified pregnant woman sleeping on her best friend's couch ended up standing on that stage, tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. Because what happened over the next 3 years wasn't luck. It wasn't revenge. And it definitely wasn't easy. It all started on a cold Thursday night, when my husband came home carrying a leather briefcase. Inside it were the papers that destroyed the life I thought we were building. The applause continued as I stepped toward the microphone. For a brief moment, I simply stood there. I looked across the ballroom. Hundreds of strangers were smiling at me. Some were recording with their phones. Some were whispering to each other. And then there was Daniel, still frozen, still staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. 3 years ago, he couldn't wait to leave me. Today, he couldn't look away. I smiled politely at the audience. "Thank you for that warm welcome." My voice sounded calm, confident. If only they knew how many nights I had spent crying myself to sleep, convinced I would never feel confident again. People love seeing the finish line, the successful business, the standing ovation, the magazine interviews, the polished speeches. What they don't see The nights you sit on the bathroom floor wondering how you're going to survive another week. They don't see the unopened bills, the empty refrigerator, the fear of becoming a single parent before your child is even born. They don't see the sacrifices hidden behind success. As I looked around the ballroom, one thought kept repeating in my mind. None of these people knew the woman I used to be. They only knew the CEO. They didn't know Emma. The pregnant woman who once counted the last $18 in her wallet. While standing in the diaper aisle of a grocery store, the woman who smiled in public, then cried in her car before driving home. The woman who kept telling herself, just make it through one more day. If someone had walked up to me back then and said, one day you'll own a company, stand on this stage, and the man who broke your heart will be sitting in the audience, I would have laughed. Not because I lacked ambition, because I couldn't even imagine surviving the next month. Success wasn't part of my plan anymore. Survival was. The truth is, this story didn't begin in a ballroom. It didn't begin with applause. And it definitely didn't begin with success. It began on an ordinary Thursday evening, when I was 8 months pregnant, making Daniel's favorite dinner, completely unaware that he had already made the biggest decision of our marriage.
By the time
the front door opened that night, the future I had spent 6 years building was already gone, 3 years earlier. Before everything fell apart, I truly believed I had a good life. Not a perfect one, just a normal one. My name is Emma Carter. At the time, I was 29 years old and worked as a marketing manager for a small healthcare company in Austin, Texas. I wasn't chasing luxury. I wasn't dreaming about becoming a CEO. If you had asked me what success looked like back then, my answer would have been simple. A happy marriage, a healthy baby, a house filled with laughter. That was enough for me. Daniel and I met during our last year of college. He was confident, funny, the kind of man who could make an entire room laugh without even trying. He wasn't rich, neither was I. We built our life from scratch. Our first apartment had stained carpets, squeaky floors, and a tiny kitchen where 2 people could barely stand at the same time. We didn't care. We were in love. On Friday nights, we'd order cheap pizza, watch old movies, and dream about the future. Daniel used to hold my hand and say, one day we'll look back at this apartment and laugh. And we did, just not for the reasons either of us expected. 6 years later, we had finally bought our first home. It wasn't huge, but every room carried a memory. The living room where we celebrated our first Christmas. The backyard where Daniel proposed planting a tree for every child we'd have. The spare bedroom we had just painted a soft cream color for our baby. I still remember standing in that room with one hand resting on my growing belly. Daniel was on the floor trying to put together a crib. He looked up, smiled, and said, "She's going to love this room." I smiled back. So are you. For a while. Life really did feel that simple. Then Victoria Hayes entered the picture. She became CEO of Daniel's company, just after I reached my 5th month of pregnancy. At first, she was simply another name, another executive. Daniel talked about how brilliant she was, how demanding she was, how she expected perfection. I never thought twice about it. Why would I? I trusted my husband completely. Then little things started changing. Daniel stopped leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. Instead, it stayed in his pocket, always, if it buzzed during dinner. He'd glance at the screen and smile before turning it face down. When I asked who it was, he'd answer without looking at me. Just work. His workdays grew longer. Business dinners became more frequent. Weekend meetings suddenly appeared on our calendar. Whenever I mentioned how much I missed spending time together, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "It's just a busy season, Em. Once this promotion comes through, everything will settle down." I wanted to believe him, maybe because trusting him felt easier than questioning him. Sarah wasn't convinced. One Saturday afternoon, she came over to help me organize baby clothes. She held up a tiny pair of pink socks and laughed. I swear baby clothes get smaller every time I see them. I smiled. They're adorable. She looked around the house. Where's Daniel? I checked the time. He had another meeting. Sarah frowned. On a Saturday, he said the CEO called everyone in. She didn't reply. Instead, she quietly folded another baby blanket before asking, Emma, can I ask you something? Of course. When was the last time the two of you had dinner together? Without him checking his phone. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I honestly couldn't remember. Sarah reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. I hope I'm wrong. So do I. That night, Daniel came home after 10. He smelled like expensive cologne, not his. I noticed immediately, there was also a faint trace of a perfume I'd never smelled before, elegant sweet, completely unfamiliar. He kissed my forehead. Sorry I'm late. I forced a smile. Long meeting? He loosened his tie. Yeah, Victoria kept everyone longer than expected. There it was again, her name. Always her name. As he walked upstairs, I watched him disappear around the corner. For the first time in 6 years, a quiet voice inside my head whispered something I didn't want to hear. Something wasn't right. I tried to ignore feeling. I told myself it was pregnancy hormones, stress, overthinking. But deep down, my heart already knew what my mind refused to accept. And just 4 days later, one small piece of paper slipped from Daniel's jacket pocket and destroyed every lie I had been telling myself. For the next 4 days, I kept telling myself Sarah was wrong. I convinced myself the late nights were temporary. The perfume meant nothing. The constant phone calls were probably work. After all, Daniel had never given me a reason not to trust him, until Thursday. That evening, I wanted to surprise him. His favorite meal. Homemade lasagna, fresh garlic bread, and a chocolate cake from the little bakery where we'd bought our wedding cake 6 years earlier. It wasn't just dinner, it was our anniversary. I even wore the blue dress Daniel once told me made me look beautiful. By 7 o'clock, everything was ready, candles were lit. Soft jazz played through the kitchen speaker. The table looked perfect. 7:30, nothing. 8 o'clock, nothing. I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls. I smiled to myself. He's probably planning something. At 8:42 p.m., my phone finally buzzed. Just one message running late. Big dinner with Victoria and the executive team. Don't wait up, that was it. No happy anniversary. No apology, no heart emoji. Nothing. I stared at the screen for almost a minute. Then I quietly blew out the candles. The room suddenly felt colder. I cut myself a small slice of cake. Took one bite, couldn't swallow it. I threw the entire plate into the trash. The next morning, as I gathered Daniel's clothes for the laundry, something slipped from the pocket of his suit jacket. A receipt. I picked it up. The name at the top caught my attention immediately. Le Chateau, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Dallas. The total, $947.63. Dinner for two. Wine dessert, private dining room. My heart started beating faster. Then I looked at the date. Our anniversary. I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood. I hadn't. The receipt trembled in my hands. Around 6 that evening, I heard Daniel's car pull into the driveway. I didn't greet him. I didn't pretend everything was okay. I simply placed the receipt in the middle of the dining table. He walked in carrying his briefcase. The moment he saw the paper, he stopped for a split second. Fear flashed across his face, then it disappeared. He calmly placed his keys on the counter. Where did you find that? It fell out of your jacket. Silence. I folded my arms. You lied to me. It wasn't what you think. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that comes right before your heart breaks. Really? Then explain why you spent almost $1,000 having dinner with another woman on our anniversary. He looked exhausted, not guilty, just tired of pretending. He slowly loosened his tie. Emma, I don't want to fight. I'm not asking for a fight. I'm asking for the truth. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the background. Rain tapped against the kitchen windows. Then Daniel took a deep breath. I've been seeing someone. The words didn't feel real. I blinked. I'm sorry. What did you just say? I've been seeing someone. Every sound in the room disappeared. I could hear nothing except my own heartbeat. I looked down at my stomach. Lily kicked. Almost as if she could feel my panic, I whispered. Who? He didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. I already knew. Still, hearing it out loud destroyed me. Victoria. I closed my eyes. Sarah had been right. Every late night, every canceled dinner, every business trip, every lie. I opened my eyes again. How long? He looked away. About 6 months. 6 months, that meant. He started the affair only weeks after we found out we were having a baby girl. While I was buying baby clothes. He was building another relationship. While I was choosing nursery colors. He was choosing someone else. Tears rolled down my face. Were you ever going to tell me? I was waiting for the right time. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The right time? I'm 8 months pregnant. His voice became colder. This isn't working anymore. What isn't? Our marriage. I stared at him. Our marriage? You decided that by yourself? He ran both hands through his hair. You deserve someone who wants this life. And you don't? He looked directly into my eyes. No, the word hit harder than a slap. I've changed. Victoria understands my ambitions. She lives in a different world, and honestly, he hesitated. I belong in that world. I felt something inside me shatter. So where does that leave me? He looked around the house, then at my stomach, then back at me. I think you'll be okay. Those 6 words told me everything. He wasn't thinking about me. He wasn't thinking about Lily. He had already left us in his mind. Then he reached into his leather briefcase. My stomach dropped. He removed a large manila envelope, carefully placed it on the table, and gently slid it toward me. I looked down. My name was printed across the front. I slowly opened it. Inside were divorce papers. Already filed. Already planned. He hadn't come home to have a conversation. He had come home to end our family. I looked up through tears. Daniel, were you ever going to fight for us? He picked up his car keys without looking back. He quietly said, I already made my choice. Then he walked out the front door. I stood there, one hand resting on my 8-month pregnant belly, the other clutching divorce papers that blurred through my tears. I thought losing my husband was the worst thing that could happen. I had no idea the next morning would take away the only place my daughter and I still had to call home. Excellent partner. Shazab hum director's cut continue Karte Hain. Is section main surf Duke Nahi Dikana. Viewer ko Emma K Sath emotionally attached Karna Hai. USA audience tabhi 40 minutes tak dekafti high. Jab wo protagonist K Lie feel carry. The house didn't feel empty after Daniel left. It felt haunted. Every room held a memory I didn't know what to do with. His coffee mug was still sitting in the sink. His running shoes were by the front door. His favorite jacket still hung in the hallway closet. It was as if half of our life had simply walked out, while the other half had been abandoned. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice. I already made my choice. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself sitting on the nursery floor. The crib was finally assembled. Tiny pink blankets were neatly folded inside one of the drawers. A stuffed elephant sat in the rocking chair. I reached down and gently touched the crib. Then I broke. Not because my marriage was over, but because my daughter hadn't even been born. And, already someone had chosen to walk away from her. I wrapped both hands around my stomach. Lily kicked softly. I whispered through tears. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. This isn't the life I wanted for you. The next morning, the doorbell rang. For one impossible second, I actually thought Daniel had come back. Maybe he'd realized what he'd done. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe. I opened the door. It wasn't Daniel. It was a courier. Emma Carter? Yes, I need your signature. He handed me a thick legal envelope. The return address read, Carter and Lane Family Attorneys. My heart sank. Inside was another stack of legal documents. Daniel wasn't just filing for divorce. He had also requested that our house be sold immediately as part of the settlement. He had already moved most of his savings into protected accounts weeks before leaving. Everything had been planned, every document, every signature. See, every step. Long before he ever looked me in the eyes and told me our marriage was over, I slowly sat down on the hallway floor. The papers slipped from my hands. I wasn't crying anymore. I was numb. An hour later, Sarah arrived. She didn't knock. She used the spare key I'd given her years ago, the moment she saw the papers scattered across the floor. She understood, without asking a single question. She sat beside me. For nearly 10 minutes. Neither of us spoke. Then she quietly reached over and took my hand. Emma, you don't have to carry this alone. That sentence broke the silence inside me. I buried my face in her shoulder and cried harder than I ever had in my life. Not because I was weak, because I had been trying so hard to stay strong. Sarah helped me pack over the next 2 days. There wasn't much baby clothes, family photos, a few kitchen dishes, my laptop, and the rocking chair I'd spent weeks searching for before Lily was born. Everything else I left behind. As I carried the last box to Sarah's car, I turned around one final time. The nursery window was still open. The white curtains moved gently in the breeze. For just a moment, I imagined bringing Lily home to that room, watching Daniel rock her to sleep, taking family pictures on her first birthday. None of those memories would ever exist. I quietly locked the front door, not realizing it would be the last time I'd ever call that house home. 3 weeks later, after 18 exhausting hours of labor, my daughter entered the world. Daniel never came. He never called. He never asked if we were okay when the nurse placed Lily in my arms. She wrapped her tiny fingers around one of mine, and in that moment, everything changed. I looked into her little face and whispered, "I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I promise you this. No matter how hard life gets, you'll never have to wonder if your mother chose you." I kissed her forehead. Tears rolled down my cheeks, not tears of fear anymore. Tears of purpose, because I didn't realize it then. But less than 2 months later, one unexpected email would arrive in my inbox. An email so ordinary that I almost deleted it. Little did I know, it would become the first step toward building the company that would one day put me face to face with Daniel again. The first 8 weeks after Lily was born were the hardest of my life. People always say newborns sleep a lot. Whoever said that had never met Lily. She woke up every 2 hours, sometimes every hour. Some nights, I'd rock her until sunrise, only to realize I'd forgotten to eat dinner. I wasn't living anymore. I was surviving. Every morning, Sarah would leave for her nursing shift around 6. Before walking out the door, she'd quietly place a cup of coffee beside my laptop. "You don't have to finish today," she'd say. "Just don't stop believing tomorrow can be better." I smiled every time she said it. But honestly, most mornings, I didn't believe her. One afternoon, while Lily was asleep on my chest, I opened my banking app, $143.82. That was everything I had. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute. Then I opened another app, my credit card, almost maxed out, rent, diapers, formula, utilities, everything felt impossible. For the first time in my life, I seriously considered giving up. Not giving up on Lily, never that, giving up on myself. Maybe Daniel had been right. Maybe I really wasn't capable of building anything on my own. Just as that thought crossed my mind, Lily opened her tiny eyes. She looked at me, then smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a little one. But somehow, it changed everything. I closed my banking app, opened my laptop, and whispered, "Okay, sweetheart. Let's exercise out together." That night, after Lily finally fell asleep, I opened an old folder on my computer. It contained every marketing campaign I had ever designed before maternity leave, website projects, advertising strategies, brand presentations. For years, I had helped other businesses grow. Maybe it was finally time to build something of my own. I created a simple website. No fancy animations, no expensive branding. Just one sentence across the homepage, helping small businesses tell bigger stories underneath it. My name, Emma Carter, no investors, no employees, no office, just a laptop sitting on Sarah's kitchen table. The next morning, I posted my services online. Then I waited. 1 day passed, nothing. 3 days, nothing. A week, still nothing. Every few hours I'd refresh my inbox, every notification made my heart race. Most were spam by the second week. I almost deleted the website then. At exactly 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, an email appeared. Subject: Marketing help needed. A small family-owned bakery outside Dallas had found my website. Their owner wrote, "We're struggling. Someone told us you're good. Can you help?" I answered within 5 minutes. Not because I was desperate, because I remembered what it felt like when someone believed in you before you believed in yourself. The bakery couldn't afford much. Their entire marketing budget was only $600. 3 years earlier, I would have turned the project down. Now, it felt like winning the lottery. I spent nearly 2 weeks working on that campaign. Every night after Lily fell asleep, I'd sit beside her crib with my laptop until 2 in the morning. I'd pause every 20 minutes just to make sure she was still breathing. Every new parent understands that fear. By the end of the project, I wasn't just tired. I was exhausted. But when the bakery launched the campaign, something incredible happened. Their weekend sales doubled. Customers lined up outside their store. The owner called me personally. His voice shook with excitement. "Emma, we've been in business for 18 years. We've never had a weekend like this." Then he said something I'll never forget. "People trust business owners. I'm telling every business owner I know about you." That single phone call changed my life. Within 2 months, I had 6 clients, then 12, then 21. I hired a freelance designer, then a copywriter. Soon, I couldn't keep up with the workload alone. Sarah walked into the kitchen one evening and laughed. "There are business papers on my dining table and baby bottles in my office bag." I laughed too. "Sorry," she smiled. "Don't apologize." She looked around the apartment, then back at me. "I think you've outgrown my kitchen." 3 months later, I rented a tiny office above an old coffee shop in downtown Austin. It wasn't impressive. The carpet was worn. The paint was chipped. The elevator barely worked. But every morning, when I unlocked that little glass door, I saw 5 words that reminded me why I refused to quit. Carter Creative Group. The first time Lily visited the office, she pointed at the logo on the wall. She couldn't pronounce every word yet. She smiled and said, "Mommy's." I laughed. "Sweethearts, this is Mommy's." She clapped her little hands to everyone else. It was just a small office. To me, it was proof that broken endings don't have to stay broken forever. By the end of our 2nd year, we had grown from 1 client to more than 70. Our team expanded. Our work began winning regional marketing awards. Business magazines started mentioning our company. For the first time since my divorce, people knew my name. Not because of my past, but because of my work. I honestly believed life had finally settled down. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because one rainy Monday morning, a black Rolls-Royce pulled into the parking lot outside my office. Every employee stopped what they were doing to look out the window. A chauffeur stepped out, opened the rear door, and a woman wearing a tailored ivory suit slowly stepped onto the sidewalk. Even after 3 years, I recognized her instantly. Victoria Hayes, Daniel's billionaire boss, the woman he destroyed our family for. She looked up at the sign that read, Carter Creative Group. Then, for the first time, she smiled and walked toward my office. I had no idea that the conversation waiting behind that glass door would completely change everything I believed about my past and Daniel's future. The entire office went quiet. Even before Victoria Hayes stepped inside, everyone knew she wasn't an ordinary visitor. My assistant Megan hurried into my office. "Emma, there are 2 security vehicles outside." I looked up from my laptop. "So?" She lowered her voice. "The woman getting out of that Rolls-Royce, that's Victoria Hayes." Every employee in the office was watching through the windows. Some whispered, others pulled out their phones. Victoria was one of the most recognizable business leaders in Texas. She rarely visited companies in person, especially not small agencies like ours, at least. That's what everyone still thought we were. I stood up, straightened my blazer, and quietly said, "Send her in." A few moments later, the glass door opened. Victoria walked inside. She looked exactly the same as she had in magazine covers. Confident, elegant, perfect posture. But something about her eyes surprised me. She didn't look arrogant. She looked tired. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she smiled politely. "Emma, it's nice to finally meet you." I didn't return the smile. "I can't say I've been looking forward to this meeting." She nodded. I understand. I probably would have felt the same." That answer caught me off guard. She slowly looked around my office. Family photos, awards, marketing trophies. A framed picture of Lily sitting on my desk. Victoria smiled at the photograph. "She's beautiful." I quietly replied, "Thank you." She looked back at me. "I imagine she's about 3 now." I froze. "How do you know her age?" Victoria took a slow breath. I've known more about your life than you probably realize. Every instinct inside me became defensive. What does that mean? Instead of answering, she placed a thick black folder on my desk. Its cover displayed the Hayes Global logo. Our board has been reviewing marketing agencies for almost 11 months. She gently slid the folder toward me. Carter Creative Group ranked first. I stared at her. There are agencies 10 times our size. I know, so why us? Her answer came immediately. Because your work is better. No hesitation, no fake compliments. Just certainty. For some reason, that meant more to me than I expected, she continued. Over the past year, my team secretly hired your agency through 3 different partner companies. I blinked. What? We wanted to evaluate your work without influencing the results. Suddenly, everything made sense. The unusually large projects, the anonymous corporate clients, the rapid growth. They hadn't been coincidences. Victoria had been testing my company without me ever knowing. You passed every review, she smiled. In fact, you exceeded them. Silence filled the office. Then she reached into her leather portfolio. This time, she removed a plain white envelope, no company logo, no address, just one handwritten word. Emma. My heart skipped. The handwriting looked painfully familiar. Daniels. I slowly looked up. What is this? Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward the office window, looking down at the busy Austin streets below. Finally, she spoke. Daniel wrote that letter almost 2 years ago. I felt my chest tighten. He asked me to give it to you. Why didn't you? She closed her eyes for a brief moment. Because I wasn't sure you deserved more pain. The room became completely silent. I whispered. So, you stayed together? Victoria slowly turned around. There was sadness in her eyes. No, we ended things a long time ago. I frowned. But, he left me for you. Victoria gave a small, almost heartbreaking smile. No, Emma. He left you. Because he believed success could replace love. And by the time he understood the difference, he had already lost both. Those words hit me harder than I expected. For 3 years, I had imagined Victoria as the woman who stole my husband. Standing in front of me now, she didn't look like a winner. She looked like someone who had watched another person destroy his own life. She gently placed the envelope in front of me. You don't have to read it today. You don't even have to forgive him. But I think, after everything you've survived, you deserve the truth. She quietly walked toward the door, then stopped. Without turning around, she said one final sentence. Emma, the biggest mistake Daniel ever made wasn't leaving his marriage. A long pause filled the room. Then she finished. It was underestimating the woman he left behind. The door closed softly. I sat alone in complete silence. The envelope remained on my desk. My name written across the front. Daniel's handwriting. 3 years of unanswered questions. We're sitting only inches away. I slowly reached for it, took one deep breath, and broke the seal. I had no idea that the words inside would completely change how I remembered the day my marriage ended. For nearly a full minute, I just stared at the envelope. My name was written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. I hadn't seen that handwriting in over 3 years. It looked strangely familiar, yet completely foreign at the same time. I slowly slid my finger beneath the seal. The paper made a soft tearing sound. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it. Inside was a single folded letter. Nothing else, no legal papers, no photographs, no dramatic confession, just one handwritten letter. At the top, it read, Emma, if you're reading this, it means I waited too long to tell you the truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, then continued reading. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to finish reading this letter. After what I did, I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. I swallowed hard. This wasn't the Daniel I remembered. His confidence, his arrogance, none of it was there. Only regret. The next paragraph stopped me for years. I convinced myself I left because I wanted success. That was a lie. The truth is, I left because I was selfish. I stared at those words. For 3 years, I had searched for a reason. Maybe our marriage wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe pregnancy changed me. Maybe I had failed somehow. Now, the man who destroyed our family was admitting something I never expected. It had never been about me. I continued reading. Victoria never asked me to leave you. She never told me to divorce you. Those choices were mine, every single one of them. I stopped again. For years, I had blamed Victoria. I imagined her stealing my husband, breaking my family, destroying my future. But according to Daniel, she hadn't. He had. Another paragraph, another painful truth. I kept telling myself I'd come back after I figured my life out. But every month that passed, it became harder to admit how badly I'd failed. I slowly shook my head. How could someone throw away their family, then believe they could simply return one day? Then came the sentence that hit me harder than anything else. The day Lily was born. I drove to the hospital parking lot. I sat there for almost 2 hours. But I was too ashamed to walk inside. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. He had been there? Only a few hundred feet away, while I was holding our newborn daughter. He was sitting alone in his car, unable to face what he'd done. A tear rolled onto the paper. I quickly wiped it away. The letter continued. Every birthday, every Christmas, I wondered what she looked like, whether she laughed like you, whether she hated me. I looked toward the framed photograph of Lily sitting on my desk. She was wearing a tiny backpack on her first day of preschool, smiling happy, safe, everything I had promised her. The final page felt heavier somehow, as if Daniel had struggled to write every word. A few months ago, I attended a business conference. Someone mentioned a company called Carter Creative Group. When I heard your last name, I thought it was a coincidence. I smiled faintly. He had no idea. Then I looked up your company online. I saw your interviews, your employees, your office, the awards. There was a long pause before the next sentence. That's when I realized. You became everything I always believed I deserved. The difference is, you earned it. I expected it. I quietly folded one corner of the letter. Those words carried more honesty than every conversation we'd had during the last year of our marriage. Then came the last paragraph. If life ever gives you the chance to see me again, you don't owe me a conversation. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me one thing. Never let Lily believe that my choices were somehow her fault. She deserved a better father than I was. I couldn't stop the tears anymore, not because I wanted Daniel back. That chapter had ended years ago. I cried because, for the first time, he had finally accepted responsibility, not with excuses, not with blame, just truth. At the very bottom of the page, there was one final sentence. I hope one day, when Lily asks about me, you'll tell her I loved her, even if I was too much of a coward to prove it. Below it, just 2 words. Daniel slowly folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. The office was completely silent. Outside the window, life in downtown Austin carried on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, people laughed, coffee shops buzzed with conversation. But inside that office, something had changed forever. For 3 years, I believed my story was about betrayal. Sitting there with Daniel's letter in my hands, I finally understood something. My story had never been about the man who walked away. It was about the woman who refused to stay broken. Just then, my office phone rang. Megan's voice came through the speaker. Emma, the organizers of the Texas Business Leadership Summit just called. They've confirmed you're the opening keynote speaker. I looked once more at Daniel's letter, then quietly placed it inside my desk drawer. I had no idea that in just 2 weeks, the man who wrote those words would be sitting in the front row, watching me walk onto a stage he never imagined I'd reach. The morning of the Texas Business Leadership Summit began long before sunrise. I stood in my hotel room, looking out over downtown Austin. The city was slowly waking up. Traffic lights blinked against the early morning sky. Coffee shops opened their doors. People hurried to work. 3 years earlier, I would have been one of them, a woman rushing to a job she hoped would someday change her life. Today, I wasn't going to work. I was opening one of the biggest business conferences in Texas. Behind me, I heard tiny footsteps. Mom? I turned around. Lily stood in the doorway wearing a little yellow dress, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked up at me and smiled. You look pretty. I laughed softly. Thank you, sweetheart. She walked over and hugged my leg. Are you nervous? I knelt beside her. A little. She placed both of her tiny hands on my cheeks, the way she had seen me do to her whenever she was scared. Then she whispered, "You'll do great." My heart melted. Sometimes, the strongest encouragement comes from the smallest people. An hour later, the convention center was alive. Television cameras, journalists, photographers, executives from across the country. The energy in the building was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Backstage, the event coordinator handed me a small bottle of water. "You've got 5 minutes." I nodded. Then, almost without thinking, I walked toward the side curtain. From there, I could see nearly the entire ballroom. More than 600 guests, every seat filled. Some people stood along the back wall because there was no room left. Then, my eyes found him, Daniel. He was sitting in the second row. Not the first. Not among the keynote speakers. Just another executive attending the conference. He looked thinner than I remembered. The confidence that once defined him had disappeared. He laughed politely at something the man beside him said. Completely unaware, he still had no idea. I quietly stepped away from the curtain. Not because I wanted to avoid him. Because I realized something. 3 years ago, seeing him would have shattered me. Today, he was simply another face in the audience. The coordinator smiled. "Emma? It's time." The lights dimmed. A hush spread across the ballroom. The host walked to the center of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen." His voice echoed through the massive hall. "Every year, we invite a business leader whose journey reminds us why resilience matters." A giant screen lit up behind him. Photos began appearing. A tiny office, one employee, a borrowed desk, a little girl coloring, while her mother worked late into the night. Then another photograph, a growing team, a larger office, regional business awards, community projects. The audience watched silently. The host continued. "Our keynote speaker didn't inherit success. She built it, one client, one late night, one impossible day at a time." I felt my throat tighten. The final slide appeared. Carter Creative Group, founded by Emma Carter. The host smiled. "Please welcome entrepreneur, mother, and founder and CEO, Emma Carter." The ballroom exploded into applause. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were so bright I could barely see the audience, but I didn't need to. I already knew where Daniel was sitting. As my eyes adjusted, I found him. He wasn't clapping anymore. He was frozen. His mouth was slightly open. The man beside him leaned over. "You okay?" Daniel never answered. His eyes stayed locked on mine for just a second. I saw every emotion pass across his face. Shock, disbelief, regret, then something unexpected. Pride. Not for himself, for me. I smiled politely. Not because of him. Because I had finally reached the moment I'd spent years working toward. I adjusted the microphone. The room became completely silent. Then I began. 3 years ago, I believed losing everything meant my life was over. No one moved. No one looked at their phones. The room was completely still. I continued. But life has a funny way of proving us wrong. Sometimes, the worst day of your life becomes the first day of the life you were always meant to build. Several people quietly nodded. Others wiped tears from their eyes. I wasn't telling them a business story. I was telling them a human one. For the next 30 minutes, I spoke about resilience, single parenthood failure, hope starting over, choosing kindness instead of bitterness. Not once did I mention Daniel by name. Not once did I talk about betrayal. Because my story wasn't about giving him more power. It was about taking my power back. When I finished, the room fell silent for a brief second. Then, every single person stood. A standing ovation. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. As I stepped away from the podium, I noticed Daniel slowly rising to his feet with everyone else. He was clapping. Tears filled his eyes. But the biggest surprise of that day didn't happen during my speech. It happened 5 minutes later. When Daniel quietly walked toward me, holding something in his hands, and what he said next was something I never expected to hear. The standing ovation continued. Long after I stepped away from the podium, people formed a line to shake my hand. Business owners thanked me for sharing my story. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice. Several reporters requested interviews. I smiled politely at everyone. Then, through the crowd, I saw Daniel. He wasn't rushing toward me, he wasn't trying to interrupt. He simply waited potently, almost like he believed he didn't deserve to be first. When the last interview ended, he slowly walked over, for a moment. Neither of us spoke. 3 years of silence stood between us. He looked older than I remembered, not because of gray hair, because regret has a way of aging people. He took a slow breath. "Hi, Emma," I nodded politely. "Hi, Daniel." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I wasn't sure you'd even acknowledge me." "I almost didn't." He gave a small, painful smile. "I wouldn't have blamed you." Silence settled between us again. Finally, he spoke. "I read every article about your company. I watched every interview. I even followed your growth online." I looked at him without saying a word. He continued. "Every award you won." I celebrated quietly. I know I had no right to. But I was proud of you. I didn't know what to say, not because I believed him, because, for the first time, he wasn't making excuses. He wasn't asking for another chance. He was simply telling the truth. Then his voice cracked. "I missed everything. Lily's first birthday. Her first steps. Her first day of preschool." He swallowed hard. "I traded my family for a future that never existed." For several seconds, the noise of the ballroom faded into the background. All I could hear was the quiet sadness in his voice. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. My heart tightened for a second. He pulled out a small photograph. It was old, worn around the edges. I recognized it immediately. It was the family photo we had taken the day we found out I was pregnant. I was laughing. Daniel had one hand on my shoulder. The ultrasound picture was between us. "I've carried this every day," he said quietly. "I don't know why. Maybe because it reminds me of the life I threw away." Just then, tiny footsteps echoed across the marble floor. "Mom!" Lily came running toward me with Sarah close behind. She wrapped both arms around my waist. "You were amazing." I laughed and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, sweetheart." Daniel stood completely still. He looked at Lily as if he were trying to memorize every detail, her smile, her curly hair, the tiny gap between her front teeth. 3 years of missed memories. Standing right in front of him, Lily looked up at me, then quietly whispered, "Mom, who's that man?" The question hung in the air. Daniel immediately lowered his eyes. He didn't expect an answer. He didn't deserve one. I gently brushed Lily's hair behind her ear, then I said softly, "He's someone who knew Mommy a long time ago." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second. Not because I had embarrassed him. Because he understood exactly what those words meant. He had become a stranger in his own daughter's life. No judge had ordered that punishment. No courtroom had created it. His own choices had. He looked back at me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a second chance. I just hope, one day, Lily grows up knowing that leaving her was the biggest mistake of my life." A tear rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I quietly said, "I forgave you a long time ago." He looked up, stunned. I continued, "Not because you deserved it, because I deserved to be free." For the first time since we had spoken, he smiled, a small broken smile. There was nothing left to argue about, nothing left to prove. I reached for Lily's hand. Sarah smiled at me from across the hallway. Without another word, the three of us walked toward the exit together. I never looked back, because some victories aren't measured by the person you leave behind. They're measured by the peace you finally carry with you. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. Absolutely, partner. Tazab hum director's cut ka emotional payoff likte hain. Is section ka gol hai, ka viewer ke dil main peace ayi. Yi section revenge nahi. Healing ka baramain hai. 6 months passed after the conference. Life finally settled into something I had once thought was impossible. Peace. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because I had stopped measuring my happiness by what I had lost. Every morning, Lily and I followed the same little routine. She'd run into my room before sunrise, climb onto my bed and whisper, "Mom, is it pancake day?" Even if it wasn't, I'd laugh and say, "It is now." Those quiet mornings became my favorite part of life. No meetings, no interviews, no painful memories. Just laughter filling a house that once existed only in my dreams. Carter Creative Group continued to grow. We opened our second office in Dallas, then a third in Houston. For the first time, I wasn't working just to survive. I was building opportunities for other people. Many of the employees I hired were single parents, people who had been told their careers were over, people who simply needed someone to believe in them. Because I knew exactly what that felt like. Every new employee received the same welcome speech. I always ended it with one sentence. Your past may explain your story, but it never gets to decide your future. Those words weren't just for them. They were for me too. One Saturday afternoon, Lily and I were planting flowers in our backyard. She looked up and asked, "Mom, why do flowers grow back every spring?" I smiled. Because they never stop trying. She thought about that for a moment. Then she nodded like it made perfect sense. Children have a beautiful way of understanding hope. A few weeks later, I received one final letter, not from Daniel, from his attorney. Inside was a short note. Daniel had officially signed away the last financial matter connecting us. There were no requests, no excuses, no hidden message. Only one handwritten sentence at the bottom. Thank you for giving Lily the life I couldn't. I quietly folded the paper, placed it inside a drawer. Then closed it, not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed to carry it. Some chapters don't need another ending. They simply need to stay closed. That evening, Lily and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold. She rested her head against my shoulder, the same way she had done since she was a toddler. After a few minutes, she looked up at me. Do you think bad days last forever? I gently kissed the top of her head. No, sweetheart. They just feel like they do. She smiled, then quietly whispered, I'm glad we kept going. My eyes filled with tears. So am I. I looked across our backyard. The porch swing moved gently in the evening breeze. The flower garden Lily had planted was beginning to bloom. The house echoed with the kind of peace I had searched for all those years. And in that moment, I finally understood something. The greatest victory of my life wasn't building a successful company. It wasn't standing on a stage. It wasn't proving Daniel wrong. It was creating a home where my daughter would never question whether she was loved. Because in the end, success isn't measured by the titles on your business card. It's measured by the people who run into your arms when you walk through the front door. And every single evening, Lily did exactly that. For me, that was more than enough. A few nights ago, Lily and I were looking through an old photo album. Most of the pictures were from the years after she was born. Birthday parties, first day of school, family vacations, camping trips, little moments that somehow became the biggest memories. She stopped on one page and looked up at me. Mom, were we always this happy? I smiled. No, sweetheart. We had to fight for this happiness. She thought about that for a second. Then she closed the album and quietly hugged me. Children have a way of reminding us what really matters. That night, after I tucked her into bed, I stood outside her bedroom for a moment, listening to the peaceful sound of her breathing. 3 years earlier, I had been terrified. I honestly believed my life was over. I believed losing my marriage meant losing my future. I couldn't have been more wrong. Sometimes, the people who walk away from your life aren't taking your future with them. They're making room for the life you were always meant to build. If Daniel had never left, I probably would have never discovered how strong I really was. I would have never started my company. I would have never met the incredible people who became part of our journey. And I would have spent the rest of my life believing my happiness depended on someone else's choices. Today, I know better. Real peace begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to fix the damage they caused. You heal, you grow, you keep moving. Not because it's easy, but because the people who love you deserve the strongest version of you. As for Daniel, I truly hope he found the peace he was searching for. Holding on to anger would have only kept me trapped in the past. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It simply gave me permission to stop carrying it. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. Now I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my position, would you have forgiven Daniel? Or would you have closed that chapter forever? Share your answer in the comments. I read as many as I can. And if this story reminded you that even the darkest seasons don't last forever, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and joined me for the next story. Because sometimes, the end of one chapter becomes the beginning of a life you never thought was possible. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never let someone else's choices decide your worth.